We are a government of laws, not of men. Those are the words of Associate Justice to the Supreme Court, Antonin Scalia. Scalia said that and a whole lot more during a headline-grabbing appearance at Princeton University that included a Q&A session with students. It was then that Scalia was asked by a Princeton freshman about his past writings on gay rights, including his dissent in a 2003 case, Lawrence versus Texas, which likened sodomy to, among other incomparables, bestiality and incest. In that case, the High Court ruled 6-3 that states cannot outlaw sodomy among consenting adults of the same sex. Disagreeing in his dissent, Scalia wrote, in part, Texas's prohibition of sodomy neither infringes a fundamental right nor is unsupported by a rational relation to what the Constitution considers a legitimate state interest, nor denies the equal protection of the laws. Emphasis added. I dissent. Scalia continued, the Texas statute undeniably seeks to further the belief of its citizens that certain forms of sexual behavior are immoral and unacceptable. The same interest furthered by criminal laws against fornication, bigamy, adultery, adult incest, bestiality, and obscenity. When questioned on those comments, as well as others Scalia has made comparing homosexual behavior to murder, by freshman Duncan Hosie, who is gay, Scalia doubled down, reaffirming the comparison he made nearly a decade ago. He told the students, quote, if we cannot have moral feelings against or objections to homosexuality, can we have it against anything? It's a reduction to the absurd. I don't think it's necessary, but I think it's effective. I'm surprised you weren't persuaded. All of this comes, of course, on the heels of the Supreme Court deciding to hear two cases on marriage equality, one dealing with California's Proposition 8 and the other with the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. Joining me now in a last word exclusive to explain why he wasn't persuaded, Duncan Hosie, the Princeton freshman who questioned Justice Scalia, and also joining me, Jonathan Turley, a professor at George Washington University Law School and a constitutional expert. Duncan, let's go to you first. Describe the scene for us in the room. What happened, and were you able to press Justice Scalia, or were you only able to ask just one question?
I think there's a fundamental difference between arguing that the Constitution doesn't protect gay rights and the Constitution justifies that we need to use this language when talking about gay rights. And that was the point of my question. I wanted to confront Justice Scalia to talk about whether the rhetoric that you cited in his Lawrence versus Texas dissent, the rhetoric that he used in his 1996 dissent in Romer versus Evans, in which he compared gay sex to murder, among other things. I wanted to ask him, are those things really necessary to make his point? I don't think he really answered that question, and I can talk about why. He was polite with me, he was cordial with me, I think he was respectful with me, but he didn't really address that question. I think the response in the room was excellent. After I asked my question, I received a round of applause from Princeton students. Princeton does a lot of work to integrate the town of Princeton into the community, and so there were many older residents there. After Scalia started talking, the older residents gave him a round of applause, which I think highlights the generational difference in views on marriage equality and gay rights as a whole. So there was a back and forth in terms of who got more applause. But again, I think he was actually polite and cordial in how he responded. I don't think his response, though, is accurate. I mean, he compared it to the reduction, to the absurd. I think his response was absurd in many aspects, in the sense that, you know, there's really no comparison between intimate homosexual couples trying to have intimate relationships and people murdering others, or people engaging in bestiality and incest. And he really didn't defend those comparisons at the level that I think he needed to, because of just the destructive and inflammatory nature of those comments. I wish he had. He's accurate. I'm not persuaded. And I think he needs to persuade a lot of more Americans about his views, because I think they're becoming increasingly out of the mainstream.
Jonathan, you've been particularly critical of Justice Scalia, and he tends to sort of veil his arguments in this claim to morality or morals. Has that always been true? And isn't that a rather porous veil, given some of the decisions he's handed down?
Well, it is certainly true that Scalia has a history, first of all, of making public statements that many of us find very difficult to square with judicial codes of conduct. You know, many judges don't make speeches at all on subjects related to pending cases. The court has 2 pending cases, and he just spoke again about one of the core issues in those cases. He's done that before, and it's very troubling. And at one time, a Chief Justice would call him up and say, look, you know, you're an exclusive club here, and the price of the ticket is stop making these speeches because there's an appearance that he's maintaining a base, his own constituency. But what's more troubling, and I really want to commend Duncan, he's a remarkable student and represents his university well, and represents, frankly, all of us well. But what Justice Scalia was talking about did succeed in reducing this to the absurd. That he talks about what's often called a slippery slope, that if you don't let legislatures declare things immoral, all these things will happen. But he's the one on the slippery slope, because if you allow the majority to simply declare anything they want to be immoral, you go back to Loving v. Virginia, when they criminalized mixed marriages. That's what you get when the majority can simply criminalize what they consider to be immoral.
Duncan, it would seem like Justice Scalia is holding on to a worldview that is increasingly, I mean, in the words of one prominent spokesperson, people are literally dying out. This is something that is, this point of view will no longer exist in several decades, if not simply years from now. I wonder what the reaction on campus was, because the issue of gay marriage or marriage equality often is divided along generational lines, and I would imagine that the student body at Princeton, regardless of their political affiliations, feels generally that this is a civil right. But I ask you, what was the reaction on campus to Scalia's comments?
I received an overwhelmingly positive reaction. I opened my email this morning and I had 92 emails. Some of them were from people all over America because the story was picked up by the Associated Press. And so I had an email from someone in Arizona, Alaska, and Alabama. I mean, just everywhere across the country. On campus, though, I have received such supportive comments. It's been really helpful to me, because I think this has been it was a very courageous thing. It took a lot of courage on my part. It's something that I was really nervous about doing, something that I had thought that maybe I wouldn't do. And I think it's also important to point out that I don't understand why conservatives like Scalia don't support gay marriage, because I think gay marriage and gay rights as a whole are really consistent with conservative values. Conservatives believe in promoting marriage as the bedrock of our society. If we want to promote marriage, we should allow more people to enter it, more people who are committed to each other, who want to make sacrifices to each other, more people who are willing to, spend their lives in these committed relationships. That is a conservative principle, and ultimately I think that in itself is consistent with conservative values.
Duncan Hosie, speaking the truth, and just a freshman. So impressive, my friend. Thank you for joining us tonight. And Jonathan Turley, professor of law at George Washington University, thank you as well.
Thank you.